what stories you're telling yourself is defining your reality. Oh, what is up, guys? Welcome to the first visual episode of A Man's Quest podcast. I am excited for this show. This is going to be so cool. If you guys don't know what this podcast is about, because obviously you don't, this is the very first episode. This podcast is for young Christian men trying to help them out on their quest, because every man needs to go on a quest. And the first episode kind of talked about that specific quest. It talked about the purpose, the importance of purpose. And in this episode, I'm going to be telling you the importance of the stories that you are telling yourself. Now, you might be wondering to yourself, what stories am I telling myself? I hardly ever, I don't tell stories to myself. I don't tell stories like The Fox and the Hen or whatever, stuff like that. And I'm not talking about those kind of stories. I'm talking about the kind of stories that are real, like the real impactful stories of your life. The kind of stories like, do you tell yourself that you're attractive or unattractive? Do you tell yourself that the world is a friendly place or an unfriendly place? I am talking about those kind of stories and why they are so important. And there are going to be a ton of guys who say, I don't tell myself any stories, or they might even be thinking that it is not that important. So the purpose of this episode is just to convince you guys how important what the stories you tell yourself are, and how to take the stories that you have been telling yourself, the stories that aren't working, and replace them with new stories about your life, new ways of thinking that will completely change who you are on a deep level. Let me go over some of the negative stories that people are telling themselves on a daily basis. So they are telling themselves stuff like, I am broken, I am not good enough, I'm awkward, I am weird, I am not able to meet my financial goals, not able to meet my personal goals. So much stuff they tell themselves every day. And you may be thinking to yourself, I don't tell myself these things, I don't have those kinds of thoughts. But that is not true. Everybody at some point has these kinds of thoughts, and that's okay. But you need to understand why they can be so toxic for your life. When you tell yourself things like this and they become your reality. See, the human brain thinks in stories. When you drive to work, you don't remember the exact signs, everything that with a photographic memory like other animals do. When you show a chimpanzee a picture of a bunch of numbers, and then you ask them to click in the pattern that the numbers were in, they can do it perfectly within milliseconds of seeing the image, because they have photographic memory. That's how their brain works. They see something and they can just see the image in their brain. But that is not how humans remember things. That is not how we live in our brain. Our brain remembers things through stories. So when you drive to work, you don't have a photographic memory of exactly what the turn looked like, or exactly what your route looks like. Oftentimes, you forget where things are on the road. You forget which road you are on, where you're going, but then all of a sudden you remember, because the habit kicks in, and you remember what it feels like to go to work. You remember the turns. You remember what you see, what roads you go on, but you don't remember exactly what you did. But if you were put in your house and told to drive somewhere you've gone 100 times, you would do it instantly. You would know exactly what you were doing, because you remembered the story of what happened. And that is also how we remember everything else in our lives, from our memories of our family, to our memories of our work or school, and our personal memories. So when you are telling yourself a story, what stories you're telling yourself is defining your reality, because you're defining your past, and your past is what created you. So it doesn't matter what actually happened. It does not matter what actually happened in your past. What matters is the story that you are telling yourself, because your thoughts, our brains, humans can make a story that they are feeling more real than reality itself. Because when we go through stories, when we play back what we thought happened, when we tell ourselves these stories in our brain cannot tell the difference between feeling the story and what is actually happening. When we tell ourselves these stories, it feels to our body like it's actually happening. If we're going back and living over that argument with our boss at work, then we are really living that out again in our bodies. Our body feels the stress, it feels maybe the anger or anxiety that you were feeling when you had that argument with your boss. But when you remember something else, like you remember your first kiss, whatever that felt like, then you will also be able to, then your body will feel like that is actually happening. So the stories that you're telling yourself is essentially creating your body, is defining who you are, because when you tell yourself these stories, your body reacts. It reacts by changing your genes, by changing your proteins, by changing your neural connections. What you think has an impact on your body. It has an impact on your physical form. And not only that, it has an impact on your mental form, the way you think, the way you act, the way you react. And when you find a story that is beneficial, one that can create a better you, that is powerful. And similarly, when you create stories, when you relive moments in your past, especially when you create moments in your past that are negative and destructive, if you go back and you relive people putting you down in school or a girl rejecting you in school, then that will constantly happen over and over and over in your head, and your brain will think that you are constantly getting rejected by that girl over and over, and it adapts to it. It begins to think to itself, if I go out and I talk to another girl, then the same thing will happen again, and I need to get prepared for that. I need to protect myself from that anxiety, to protect myself from that happening again, so you don't go out and talk to any more girls. And similar with just regular conversations, when you're talking to someone and you're having a good time, but all of a sudden you say a joke and the room is silent, nobody laughs, and like people even make fun of you for the joke because they think it's stupid, or they thought it was offensive, maybe something terrible, and everyone is judging you and you feel terrible, and you're just like, I want to go home, like I don't want to be in this place anymore. I feel like I'm socially ostracized. If you keep on living that over in your head, then the same thing will happen. You will not want to go to social interactions anymore, and you will feel anxious in social interactions just like that, and your body will adapt to that. It will become the person who is afraid of social interactions. That is how your body will adapt. It will create new neural connections to adapt to this scenario. It will change how your body functions. You will be living in fear, and when you're living in fear, you can't have a creation mindset. Because if you are telling yourself stories that are making you live in fear of doing things, then what happens is your body goes into a survival mindset. And when you're in a survival mindset, then you can't create things. Because if you're running from a bear, if you're running for your life, if you're living in fear, then you don't have time to create something. You don't have time to be at peace with yourself. When your stress hormones kick in, it causes a chain reaction of events. It causes stuff like saliva to stop being produced on your tongue, because now is not the time to be eating stuff. It takes all the energy from your stomach and reverts it to your senses or to your muscles so that you can better react to this situation. It makes you more on edge, and basically it takes all the energy from healing your body and creating new pathways, and it sends it all to just surviving, to living in the moment. You can't think about the future if you're running for your life, if you're just trying to survive. Because back in when we were hunter-gatherers, we lived in relative peace and then extreme terror at times when maybe another human came out with a bow and arrow and ambushed us and was trying to kill us. And we had to run for our lives. We had to give up everything else, everything that we were thinking about, any peace that we might have had, any creation, any thoughts about the future, any thoughts about the past, and just run. And that is all we can do. We had to focus all of our senses, all of our energy, not on healing our body, not on making ourselves a better person, but on surviving. And that is exactly what's happening when you're living in fear constantly from the stories that you're telling yourself. If you keep on living in fear, then you'll never be able to create anything because you're living in the present. Or worse, you're living in the past. You're reliving these moments of stress over and over, even though they're gone, even though they might not have even happened. You can create whatever stories you want, and oftentimes people over-exaggerate what happens. They go to that party and, maybe they got ridiculed or whatever, but they blow it up out of proportion and they feel like it was absolutely humiliating, and the memory that they have is completely different from what happened, what actually happened. And that is another important thing to note, is that the human memory is not perfect. Eyewitnesses are notoriously bad at remembering ridiculously obvious things about a situation. They could be shown a video of someone robbing a store and they could get the gender wrong. Like, a good portion of the people would not even remember the gender of the person robbing the store. A woman would come in, the researcher would show them the film, and they would say, upon recalling the video, they would say that a man robbed the store, but they are certain of it because that is the story that they are telling themselves. But the story that they are telling themselves, how they remember it, does not align up with what actually happened. And I know this is another hard truth to swallow because we like to think that our brains perfectly remember what happened, and that when we think about those things, when we think about all the times that we've been humiliated socially or physically, then we assume that those are exactly what happened. But most likely, you are overblowing it and making yourself more likely to be afraid to go out into a situation like that again. And another important thing to note is that you can create more positive versions of what actually happened. And that is something that I want to be talking about today. So one of the most important stories is the story of Christianity. Now, of course, this is, of course, very religious, but I feel like the story of Christianity is one that is powerful. So, of course, if you are listening to this podcast, I assume that you are a Christian because that is who this podcast is for. But if you're not a Christian, then just keep an open mind as I explain this story. So, Christianity, basically, what it says is that God in the beginning created everyone, everything. He planned everything out, and he has control of everything. And not only that, he created you. He created you specifically, and he knows everything, every thought that you have. He knows everything that will happen in your life from the beginning of time. He planned it all out, and there is not one single thing he did not think when he created you. Not only did he plan it all out, he planned it perfectly. Every single fiber in your being, every single one, is perfectly created by the divine creator of the universe. You get specific attention. You get undivided, unmerited favor just for being you. And this is a powerful story. I think this is the most powerful story that you should be telling yourself, and that everyone should be telling yourself. Now, of course, I say story. Now, this is also going to be quite controversial, but my view on Christianity is I like to think of it as a story. Now, I don't know if God literally exists, and I know that is a bit taboo, especially for the Christian community. If you tell other people that, especially in your church, other devout Christians, that you don't know, if you literally believe in the scientific, unmistakable evidence that God exists, then you can receive a lot of backlash. A lot of people might think that you're not truly a Christian, not truly following God. However, so I don't believe I don't believe that there is strong scientific evidence for there being a God, for this story being true. However, I do believe it in the deepest part of my being that this story is true, that there truly is a God, and that he made me, and he made everything, and he made it all perfectly from the moment it started with, from the words of his mouth. Now, I know that doesn't really make sense to people, because as humans, we want to accept our stories. We want to accept the stories that we're telling ourselves. We want to believe that they are perfectly justified, and that there's only one correct story, and it can be figured out through observation. For instance, we can observe what people think of us, and through that evidence, determine the correct story of who we are. If people think that we're ugly and short and unattractive, then through that evidence, we can assume that we are all those things because of all this evidence. And we take this belief in, being able to trust in what we find so far that people will trust in science above all else. But even beyond their own beliefs or perceptions or whatever they see in their own lives, they will instead put their trust in science to tell them what is going on. And it's very hard for people to accept how much we don't know, and to surrender essentially to the unknowing of the world, because there is so much that we don't know, there is so much that is beyond us that we will never be able to find out. We don't even know a fraction of what there is in the universe, because there is an infinite amount of knowledge in the universe, and we only know a finite amount. We will only ever know a finite amount. We will never have the infinite knowledge of the higher power that is God. So it is so difficult for humans to give up their trust in science, because that is what they rely on. It makes them feel like they have control over their lives, because they know they have a sense of knowing. But when you surrender to the unknowing, when you put your trust in something beyond science, beyond what you can see, something that you just have to jump into, then people get scared. They think it's crazy. They think it doesn't make any sense, because why would you believe in something that there's no reason to believe in, except that you are just surrendering your knowledge to a higher power, and accepting that you don't know everything and that you can't know everything. So that is the first powerful story that I think you should be telling yourself. So I already talked about one positive story, because I just thought that was the most important thing. I wanted to get that right out so that that would be at the very beginning of the video. And that was, of course, the story of Christianity, and how powerful that was, how important that was, how important it is to our lives and to our well-being. And another important story that I want you guys to be telling yourselves is the story that you are good enough. And of course, this story ties in perfectly with the story of Christianity, because when God created you, he created you perfectly, okay? So no matter what other people are saying about you, no matter what other people are thinking about you, no matter what stories you're telling yourself about who you are, no matter what you remember, what you think you remember, God created you perfectly. And whether you want to believe that or not, it is true, and you can make it true, because just by believing in that story, just by believing in it, you make it a reality. You become the person that God created you to be, returning to the state of perfection that you were. The day you were born is a choice. It is not something that you have to work for. It is not something that only a few people can achieve. It is something that you can achieve, and it's something that you can achieve right now. It is a choice. It is simply coming into being with the state of perfection that you were the day God created you. Whatever he created you to be a man, he created you to be the man that you are today. Whoever that is. And of course, you have gone astray. Of course, you have made mistakes. Everybody has. Every single human has. But God created you in His image. He created you perfectly, and He wants you to be the best that you can be. He loves you no matter what. You are completely deserving of His love, and you are completely deserving of all love from other people and from God and from especially yourself. You deserve to respect yourself. You deserve to take care of yourself. You deserve to tell yourself better stories, because you need to tell yourself stories like, I am attractive, I am athletic, I am capable of doing my job well, I am capable of doing well in school. These are the stories that you need to tell yourself. And of course, when you think about this, you think, there's no way that I could be attractive. That doesn't make any sense. And this is a story that I struggle with, because I feel self-conscious about my height. I'm always worried, like, are people thinking less of me? Am I going to go less far in the professional world because of my height, because people don't respect me as much because I'm short, and I have a hard time telling myself that I'm attractive, because there are people who, in my opinion, are objectively more attractive than me. And how could I be attractive? I mean, I can look at my flaws in the mirror and see them. I mean, I've got all the evidence, all the stories that I could ever need to justify the belief, the story that I'm telling myself that I'm an unattractive man. And it's very easy to fall into that, especially if you feel like you have evidence of your story. If you feel like there is experiences that you've had to back that story up, and not only does the story, is the story so deeply rooted in your mind, but you're making it more deeply rooted because you're living into that reality. So as you tell yourself that you're unattractive, that you're short, that you have, a bunch of acne, whatever it is, that you're weak, that you're fat, whatever it is that you're telling yourself, you live in that reality. Your body thinks that is what's happening. If you are imagining that people don't want to talk to you in your brain, then that is what your body thinks is happening. You're making your body adapt to that reality and making your body expect that reality. And therefore, as you expect that reality, you make that reality real. The focus, wherever you put your focus, that is what reality you will make happen. And you need to tell yourself better stories. You are worthy of telling yourself that you are attractive. You may not feel like it, but you can change that, okay? You can become the most attractive, most worthy, most lovable, most worthy of conversation, most whatever it is you want to believe about yourself. You can make yourself the best version of that just by telling yourself that story. If you imagine in your brain, if instead of thinking those negative stories about you going up to people and imagining them all hating you and not wanting to talk to you, if you imagine instead you going up to people and people respecting you and enjoying talking to you, then that is what will happen, because your body will adapt to it, and that is what you will come to expect. And you deserve to tell yourself these positive stories because you're a child of God. That has been the podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you will check out newer content as I upload it. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, and if you're watching this, if you're listening to this on a podcast or iTunes, make sure to subscribe there and give it a 5-star review if you are on iTunes, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.